Well, what about gifting? It's always a question that comes up at every meeting. You used to be able to give money away, and the gifting and eligibility period, because if you do a gift, there is a penalty. The penalty is calculated by dividing the gift by the state divisor. But the key difference that the legislation changed is that the penalty under the old law used to start on the date of the gift. Now the penalty doesn't start until a future date. They added 2 contingencies. The penalty now will not start till you're below $1,500, in other words, Medicaid eligible, and you're in a nursing home. So that means if you gave away that same $30,000 gift, it could technically be still on your record as a gift for 4 years instead of just 10 months. So that's a significant change. And the real sad part of that change is that gifts are also the money you give to your church, birthday presents, and Christmas presents. Those are all gifts. Those all create penalties under the new rule, and those penalties don't come up until a future date. So I don't know that Congress intended that to happen, but unfortunately, because they tried to tighten this down so much, they created this unintentional issue. The look-back period went from 3 years to 5 years. And again, here's another misconception. It's not a ban on planning. The look-back period is just what they get to see, but it doesn't mean that you can't do some planning as long as it's within the rules. So again, people come in and say, darn, I should have done this 5 years ago. I said, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Because what you have to look at is you can still do planning, it's just that the rules are a little bit different. So again, it's not hopeless. And of course, as you can see my optimistic nature coming out, the glass is half full, and we live in an abundant society, and no matter what is going on in the economy, there's some silver lining to all of that. The reverse mortgage, for example, is one of those products. It's a good product right now because they're giving you almost as much as you could sell your home for, and you don't have to sell it, and you get all that cash. Again, we talked just now about the innocent transfers, but I wanted to kind of highlight some of them because we get the clients that come up and say, gee, Mr. Stano, I want to sell my car to my son for $50. I said, well, what's it worth? He said, well, about 30. I said, no, that's a gift. Oh, I got to pay his credit card off. No, that's a gift. So again, one of the others is that if you're joint on an account, a bank account, we had a couple of kids that came in a month or so ago, and they felt pretty good. They're going, yeah, Dad added me 10 years ago on his account. We only have to lose half. And I said, well, if you change the Medicaid rule, I guess that would be true. But Medicaid looks at contribution. If you didn't put any money in the account, you don't own any of it in their eyes. And it's 100% the asset of the person in the nursing home. So they would have to deal with 100% value. Now, if you do add them onto real estate, that's different because they have to sign in order to sell it. So potentially that gift occurred at the time you did it. Now you just got to be a little careful because now you've inherited all of your children's problems. If they get a big creditor, a divorce, or bankruptcy, they may end up taking your house. Because if it's joint and survivor, joint means they own the whole thing from the perspective of the legal system. So if they got a big creditor, they kick you out of your house, you go to the street, and the son basically said sorry. So you have to be really careful about who you add onto your accounts. It's much better to work with power of attorney, or again, I like the idea of doing the reverse mortgage. If I want my children to have some money, I take the money, do the reverse mortgage. I still own the property, but I've taken out the cash, and I give that to them. Because it's not going to change how I live, because I still have the same amount in the bank, and I'm still getting the same amount every month. But this is money that's under my feet today that I'm not really utilizing. And, of course, if property values continue to decline, you really made a good deal, because now you got more than you could sell it for, if you could even sell your property. Because we had a client that was in West Park, and I said, you know, you better do the reverse mortgage before they change the rule about the police department having to live there. because when they move out, West Park could nosedive. And they said, wow, I never thought of that. But the same thing could happen out here. Property values could decline. If the stimulus package doesn't work, we could be in for another round of devaluation. And you already pulled the money out. So they can't come back and say, oh, you have to pay us back because your house is not worth as much. And the reason for that is because the bank cannot lose in a reverse mortgage. They have private mortgage insurance. Private mortgage insurance makes sure that they get repaid 100%. So they cannot lose. Well, can I still give my money away after February 8, 2006? Well, the answer is yes, but it has to be done quite a bit differently. It's not so obvious as it was before the rule change. And that sort of brings us, what other steps can we take? Well, before you think about gifting, you have to make sure that the children don't have issues themselves. And as I always say to my clients, you know that by the time they're 16 years old. They don't dramatically change all of a sudden. Now they're a spendthrift when they're young, and now all of a sudden they're an adult and they don't have any of those issues. You can also use trust planning. Asset protection trusts are still available in Ohio. And if you put the assets in there and you get through the 5-year look back, those assets are protected. So again, that's going to be something that would be available to you if you can't get long-term care. If you can't get long-term care insurance, the next step down is going to be possibly using a trust planning strategy. Now, are there other steps to consider? Well, of course, you want to dovetail your plan to also include looking at what documents you have in place. How old is your financial power of attorney? Do you have a current health care power of attorney and a living will? The financial power of attorney is a critical document most of the time for me to do my job. Most of our clients come to us during crisis, which means they're headed to the nursing home relatively soon or assisted living. I waited, but I'm still interested in doing something. A lot of times we need to have that financial power of attorney, so it's critical that that's in place. Obviously, the health care powers of attorney and the living will come into place if we're in a situation where a person's brain dead, no hope for recovery. We want to take them from life support. You better have that document or you're not going to be able to do it. The other issue that comes into play when we're doing planning is if we know that one of the spouses has some medical issues, we may want to put more assets into the name of the healthy spouse and point them directly to the children. So in other words, if the healthy spouse dies first because they get run over by a bus, those assets then go to the children, and mom or dad can go on Medicaid in a nursing home because there's no one to watch them. A lot of our clients are at home only because they have a spouse that can watch over them. So many times we want to make sure that we're considering that. Because if we leave it the way it is today and don't make an alteration, everything goes back and forth to husband and wife. So that means all those assets went to the spouse that has to go to the nursing home, who has to get now down to $1,500. Now, if you had long-term care insurance, you don't have to worry about it. So again, I'll come back to that panacea is if you can get this long-term care insurance in place, and because of this partnership alliance, not only we have long-term care, but now we have the safety net below that. When I was advocating that product 2 years ago, there was no safety net. So when you ran out of long-term care, if you only had a 3-year policy, you still had 2 more years to get through the 5-year look back. So again, this is something that the states are incentivizing us to buy long-term care insurance because they can't afford to continue to pay the costs of Medicaid. Medicaid is the second biggest budget item in the state of Ohio. So this is where they're incentivizing, and that's why it really makes sense to go ahead and do it.